It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or shine. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Sharp, steady, like a sound from a different lifetime. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my hand froze midair. There he was, the man I once thought I'd marry, standing on my porch after 50 years. His hair had gone silver, his shoulders rounded with age, but those eyes, those same blue eyes that used to look at me across the schoolyard, still carried that half smile I'd never forgotten. "Hello, Margaret," he said softly, almost afraid I'd disappear if he blinked. And just like that, every wall I'd built over the years began to tremble. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, clutching my coffee like it might stop my heart from leaping out of my chest. "Daniel," I finally breathed, How did you find me?" He smiled, and in that moment, I could see the boy he used to be. The boy who used to sneak me cherry pies from his mother's kitchen. The boy who promised me, under the oak tree, that he'd come back for me one day. "I never stopped looking," he said. "Now, before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about me. I wasn't always the calm old lady people think I am now. I used to be fire, full of dreams and plans and love that could have burned through anything. But when Daniel left, that fire turned into ash. We were 17 when we first fell in love, growing up in a small town in Ohio called Maple Ridge. He was the sheriff's son, tall and kind, always smelling faintly of pine wood and engine oil. I was the baker's daughter, quiet, bookish, always hiding behind the counter with flour on my hands. We were opposites, but in each other, we found everything that felt missing from home. My father never approved. He used to say, "A man with too many dreams and too little money is a heartbreak waiting to happen." But I didn't care. When you're 17, you don't think about consequences. You just feel. We had plans to leave town after graduation. Daniel had been accepted into a college in Chicago, and he wanted me to come with him. We even bought 2 train tickets, tucked them inside my diary, under the page where he'd written, June 4th, the day we begin forever. But fate has a cruel way of rearranging what young hearts dream up. 2 weeks before that date, his father had a heart attack. The family business, a small hardware store, began to fall apart, and Daniel decided to stay. I still remember that night behind the store when he told me. His hands were trembling, his eyes glistening with guilt. "I have to do this, Maggie," he said, "just for a while." He promised to come back, but a while became months, and months became silence. Letters stopped coming. Calls went unanswered, and eventually, I learned to stop checking the mailbox. Life carried me forward, the way it always does. I married a man named Henry Thompson when I was 24. He was kind, dependable, a good husband, not a man of grand words, but one of steady hands and quiet devotion. We built a small life together, 2 children, a modest home, and a love that was gentle but never wild. Henry passed 12 years ago. I mourned him deeply. But somewhere, hidden in a corner of my heart, Daniel's memory never really left. So imagine my shock, 50 years later, when he showed up on my doorstep, holding a faded photograph of us under that same oak tree. He looked around the house as I invited him in. "You kept it," he said, pointing to the small music box sitting on the shelf. It was shaped like a bird, its wings chipped from years of dusting. He'd given it to me the night before he left. I smiled faintly. I tried to throw it away once, but it kept finding its way back. He laughed, that same deep laugh I'd once memorized. We sat down, awkward at first, like strangers, learning how to speak again. But soon the years began to melt away. He told me about his life, how he'd moved around the country fixing old buildings, how he'd married once but it didn't last, how he'd spent years wondering what might have been if he hadn't stayed behind that summer. And then he looked at me with a kind of sorrow that made me shiver. "I thought you hated me," he said. That's why I never came back. I frowned. Hated you. Daniel, I waited for you for years. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Then someone lied to us. That was the first time I saw something dark flicker in his eyes, a shadow that didn't belong to the boy I remembered. What do you mean someone lied to us? I asked. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. After my father died, someone came to see me. Said you'd moved on. Said you'd married another man, even before I left town. I froze. That's not true. I know that now, he said softly. But back then, I believed it. I was angry, hurt. I thought you'd forgotten me. So I stopped writing. I told myself you were happy, and I tried to be too. I felt tears sting my eyes. Who told you that? He looked up, and for the first time since he arrived, he seemed uncertain, almost afraid. That's what I came to find out, he said. We talked for hours. The past unraveled between us like an old spool of thread, tangled, fragile, yet impossible to throw away. He told me he'd never stop thinking about me, that sometimes he'd drive through towns just to look at bakeries, wondering if one of them might be mine. And I told him about my life, my children, my husband, my years of waiting and wondering. There was laughter, and there were tears, and somewhere between those old memories, something small and dangerous began to stir again, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. When he reached across the table and took my hand, I didn't pull away. It felt wrong and right all at once. That evening, as he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Maggie, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago. My chest tightened. What is it? He hesitated, like a man standing at the edge of a confession. Not tonight, he said. Tomorrow. I'll come back after lunch, and before I could ask why, he leaned forward and kissed my cheek. Soft, trembling, full of 50 years of silence. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down the road, his figure swallowed by the fading light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, his eyes, his touch. There was something behind them, something he was afraid to say. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt a chill run through me, like the past wasn't done with us yet. The next day, I set out 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him. But noon came and went, and Daniel never arrived. When I called the number he'd given me, a woman answered, her voice calm but distant. I'm sorry, she said softly. Are you a friend of Daniel's? Yes, I said. He was supposed to meet me today. There was a long pause. Then she said something that made my knees weaken. Ma'am, Daniel passed away last night. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, unable to breathe. It didn't make sense. He had just been here, laughing, smiling, alive. How? I whispered. The woman sighed. He had been ill for some time. Heart complications. We didn't think. She stopped. He must have gone to see you. He mentioned an old love. Said he had something to make right before it was too late. My hands began to shake. I wanted to scream. But before I could speak, she added something. Something that made my heart freeze entirely. He left a letter for you, she said, and I think you deserve to know what it says. And that's where my story really begins. The moment I realized that some secrets don't die, they just wait for the right time to surface. Because that letter, the one Daniel left behind, carried a truth so deep, so devastating, it would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband, and the man I had loved since I was 17. If you've ever wondered whether first love can survive 50 years, stay with me. You're about to find out what happens when it finally knocks on the door and leaves behind a secret that changes everything. Would you have opened that door after 50 years? Tell me in the comments. I read every story. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope like it was alive. It had my name written in a shaky hand, Margaret Thompson. The letters trembled slightly, as if the writer's hands were weak when he wrote them. I couldn't bring myself to open it. For hours, I just stared. The coffee beside me had gone cold, untouched since morning. It felt unreal. Daniel had been here just yesterday. His laughter still lingered in the corners of the house, the faint smell of his aftershave still in the air. And now, he was gone. My fingers brushed over the paper. 50 years apart. One day together. And now this. A letter that felt heavier than any truth I'd ever known. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened it. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back to your porch. I'm sorry for that. I thought I had more time. I always thought I did. I came to tell you something I should have said 50 years ago. You didn't just lose me back then, Maggie. You were made to. Someone made sure we would never find each other again. And the truth is, it wasn't fate that kept us apart. It was your husband. Henry knew about us. He knew everything. He's the one who told me you'd moved on. He came to me himself. The words blurred as my vision swam. I read that line again and again. Henry? My Henry? I whispered his name aloud like it might prove something. He'd been my husband for nearly 40 years. Steady, kind, the man who brought me tea when I was sick, who kissed my forehead goodnight, the man who held me when I cried over the past, never once asking why. Could he have done that? I folded the letter in my shaking hands. It didn't make sense. Henry and Daniel had never even met. At least that's what I thought. I drove to my daughter's house that afternoon. Anna opened the door, her warm smile fading when she saw my face. Mum, are you all right? I handed her the letter without a word. She read it quietly, her lips moving, eyes widening. Do you think it's true? She asked. I don't know, I whispered. But if it is, then everything I believed about my marriage was built on a lie. Anna squeezed my hand. Mom, Dad loved you. I saw it every day, I nodded, but deep inside, something was unraveling. Love and truth don't always walk hand in hand. That night, I pulled out an old box from the closet, the one Henry had told me never to open because it's just old junk from our early days. Inside were letters, photographs, receipts, and, tucked under a yellowed napkin, a small envelope addressed to Mr. Daniel Pierce. My breath caught. The handwriting was Henry's. I opened it, my hands trembling so hard I could barely unfold the paper. Daniel, this is Henry Thompson. I think it's time you stop writing to Margaret. She's moved on. She's happy now. She's engaged, to me. Do her a kindness and let her live her life. Don't make things harder than they already are. I promise I'll take care of her. I dropped the letter. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I sat on the floor, shaking. I tried to piece it together. The way Henry used to tense up whenever I mentioned the past. The way he'd burn old letters without showing me what they were, saying, some things don't belong in our new life. It wasn't fate that took Daniel away from me. It was Henry. All those years of comforting me while hiding the truth. All those nights I cried for a man I thought had forgotten me. And Henry just held me tighter. He didn't want to lose me. So he lied. For hours I just sat there, surrounded by ghosts. The clock ticked loudly in the empty room, echoing in my chest like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me anymore. When I finally stood up, I saw something else at the bottom of the box, a small photograph. It was Daniel and me, the summer before he left. But on the back, written in Henry's handwriting, were 3 words, I couldn't lose. The next morning, I called Anna again. Mum, are you sure you want to dig into this? She asked. I have to, I said. If Daniel found the courage to come back after 50 years, I can find the truth. So I started with what I had, that letter from Henry to Daniel. I checked the postmark, July 1969, sent from Maple Ridge. But Daniel had left town in August, meaning Henry's letter reached him just before our train date, before forever was supposed to begin. I spent the next few days searching through old drawers, boxes, anywhere Henry might have hidden more. And then, tucked behind our wedding album, I found something else. A photograph. Henry, standing beside Daniel's father, smiling. My heart pounded. Henry had always claimed he'd never met the Pierces, but the picture told a different story. On the back, a note. Maple Ridge Hardware, 1968. Partnership deals signed. Partnership. That meant Henry had worked with Daniel's father. He knew Daniel. He knew everything. And suddenly, it all made sense. How he'd appeared in my life right after Daniel left. How he'd comforted me when I was heartbroken. How he'd offered stability when all I wanted was escape. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. That night, I sat by the window, the letter on my lap. I kept reading Daniel's words, searching for something more. Something beyond the betrayal. Toward the end of the letter, I found another line I hadn't noticed before. If you ever wonder whether what we had was real, it was. You were my first and last love, Maggie. But if you look deeper, you might find the truth you've been kept from for too long. Check the old oak tree. Our initials still mean something. The oak tree, the same one where we carved D+M the night he promised to come back. The next morning, I drove out to Maple Ridge. The town hadn't changed much. Same dusty road, same diner on the corner, same air that smelled faintly of pine and rain. When I reached the field, the oak was still there. Taller, older, but still standing proud. I walked closer, running my hand along the bark until I found our initials, faint but still visible. And just below them, hidden behind a knot in the wood, was something else. A small rusted tin box wedged deep into the trunk. My heart raced as I pried it open. Inside were two things: a folded piece of paper and a small silver ring. I unfolded the paper, my eyes already filling with tears. June 4th, 1969. For Maggie, in case I can't make it. This was supposed to be your ring. I wanted to ask you before the train. If you find this one day, I hope it means we somehow found our way back. Forever yours, Daniel. I held the ring in my palm. It was simple, small, with a tiny heart engraved inside. And for the first time in 50 years, I cried like a young girl again. But when I turned the note over, something else was written there. In a different handwriting. A handwriting I recognized. Henry's. You were never meant to find this. I stumbled backward, the paper slipping from my hands. He'd come here. He knew about the box. He'd seen it, maybe even tried to take it. And suddenly, I remembered something else. A story Henry once told me early in our marriage, about finding a box in the woods when he was young. He'd laughed it off, said it was full of old love notes from some foolish boy. That wasn't a story. It was a confession. I drove home in silence, the world outside blurring past my windows. I felt sick, betrayed, not just by what Henry had done, but by all the years he'd pretended it never happened. He'd let me mourn Daniel like a ghost while living a lie beside me. By the time I reached home, the sky had turned a dull grey. I sat in my car for a long time, the ring still in my hand, the weight of 50 years pressing on my chest. When I finally stepped inside, Anna was waiting. "Mum, where were you?" she asked. I looked at her, tears brimming. "Finding the truth." She frowned, worried. "What truth?" I opened my palm, showing her the ring, and then I told her everything. The letter, the box, the photograph, Henry's note. When I finished, she didn't speak for a long while. Then she said quietly, "Dad loved you, Mum. Maybe he thought he was protecting you." I shook my head. Love built on lies isn't love, Anna. It's control. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the stars blink through the clouds. In my lap lay Daniel's letter, creased, tear-stained, but still warm with his voice. I traced his name one last time. "Why now?" I whispered to the empty room. "Why did you come back after all these years?" The silence gave no answer, only the faint rustle of the curtains, like someone breathing beside me. And then I noticed something. The envelope wasn't completely empty. There was a small card tucked deep inside. I pulled it out, It was from a storage unit in Chicago, dated just a week ago. In Daniel's handwriting, it said, "If anything happens to me, Maggie deserves to see what's inside." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a lost love. This was about secrets still waiting to be found. Secrets Henry had buried, maybe with help from others. I clutched the card tight, my pulse racing. Tomorrow I'd go to Chicago, and whatever waited in that storage unit, I'd face it, even if it meant rewriting everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband, and the man I once loved. What would you do if you found out your entire marriage was built on a lie? Tell me what your heart says below. I'll be reading every word. I thought I'd faced the hardest part already. That after finding Michael again and learning the truth about his marriage, nothing could hurt me more. But life, as it always does, had one last cruel twist to give me. And it came wrapped in dust and memory, inside an old wooden box in my attic. It was a stormy afternoon when I went up there, the kind of day that makes old bones ache and hearts heavy with reflection. I wasn't looking for anything, really, just trying to clean up old things, maybe find peace in order. But the moment I saw that familiar wooden chest, the one Michael had carved my initials into when we were barely 18, something inside me froze. I hadn't touched it in years, not since my husband Daniel passed away. The brass lock was rusted, but my trembling fingers managed to pry it open. And there it was, a bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon. My name on every one of them. Eleanor. His handwriting. Michael's. My throat tightened as I untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated 1973, the year he left for college in Chicago, the year my world changed. I began to read, each word pulling me back into a time when love felt like oxygen. He had written about his loneliness, his dreams, how much he missed me. But as I read on, the tone shifted. By the fourth letter, he spoke of guilt. By the fifth, he mentioned a promise, something he had to keep, something that had saved a life. And by the sixth letter, my entire body went cold. Eleanor, if you ever find this, know that I didn't choose to leave you. I was told to. Your father made me. He said if I didn't walk away, he'd destroy my mother's life. He knew something about her past, something that could have ruined us both. I dropped the paper. My father. The man who had died decades ago, the one I had worshipped as an example of integrity and faith. I couldn't breathe. I read the rest with shaking hands, the words swimming before my eyes. He said you were too good for me, too young, too naive to understand what real sacrifice meant. So I made the sacrifice for you. I left. But I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. For a long time, I just sat there in the dust and silence, staring at those letters. The storm outside raged on, but the storm inside me was worse. All these years, 50 years, I had carried this ache, believing he had chosen someone else, believing love had failed me. But it wasn't love that failed. It was the truth that was buried. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I felt betrayed, not by Michael, but by my own father. When I saw Michael again months ago, when he walked into that cafe with his cane and trembling smile, I thought fate was giving me a second chance. I didn't know it was reopening an old wound my family had sealed in silence. That night I called him. He answered, his voice soft but shaky. "Eleanor." "I found the letters," I said. There was a pause, a heavy breath. Then, "I wondered if you ever would. Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," he said quietly. "Your father made me promise never to speak of it. I thought, maybe you'd moved on. Maybe it was kinder to let you believe I was gone."
"But you married someone else," I whispered. He sighed. "Her name was Claire. She was dying, Ellie. Cancer. I couldn't walk away from her. She reminded me of what love costs. I stayed because she had no one else." My tears came again, but softer this time. Not from anger, but from a deep, aching sorrow. For the years lost, the chances missed, the lives we'd lived apart. We met again the next morning. He came to my house, and for the first time in 50 years, we sat side by side in silence, not lovers, not strangers, just two old souls bound by time and unfinished love. He looked older than I remembered. His hands trembled when he reached for mine. "You deserved so much better than what life gave you," he said. I smiled faintly. We both did. We spent hours talking. About our youth, about the what-ifs, about how cruelly the world can turn two hearts into strangers. I told him about Daniel, how kind he was, how he'd made me laugh through my grief. Michael listened quietly, and when I finished, he said, "I'm glad you had someone to love you when I couldn't." There was something in his tone I couldn't place, an edge of finality, like he was saying goodbye without saying it aloud. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the way he'd looked at me, the way his hand lingered a little too long when we said goodnight. It felt like the closing of a book. The next morning, I drove to his apartment. The door was unlocked, and there, on his kitchen table, lay another letter, with my name on it. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found peace. My heart's grown tired. I didn't want you to see me fade again.
Please don't be sad.
Remember me as I was, the boy who carved your name into that tree, the man who never stopped loving you. You were my home, even when I had no roof to sleep under. Love, always, Michael." The words blurred through my tears. I sank to the floor, clutching the letter to my chest, and for the first time in decades, I wept like that 17-year-old girl again, full of love, loss, and the unbearable ache of time. They said he passed peacefully in his sleep that night. The doctors called it heart failure. But I knew better. His heart had simply carried too much for too long. At his funeral, I placed the letters in his casket, tied again with that red ribbon. "You found me once," I whispered, "and I'll find you again, wherever you are." When I walked away, I felt something strange, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. As if, in losing him again, I had finally understood what love truly was. It wasn't possession or time, or even happy endings. It was endurance, the kind that stays, quietly, through decades of silence. And yet, just when I thought the story had finally closed, fate handed me one last envelope. 2 weeks later, a lawyer knocked on my door with Michael's handwriting on a final letter, one he had left with his will. I opened it slowly, heart pounding, and when I saw what was inside, my knees nearly gave out. When the lawyer handed me the letter, I could barely breathe. It was sealed with a wax stamp, something Michael always loved doing when we were young, as if he believed every message should carry weight. My hands trembled as I opened it. The smell of old paper and faint cologne, his cologne, hit me all at once, and before I even began reading, tears blurred my sight. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are holding this, I am gone. But there's something you need to know before you decide how to remember me. Something I could not say in life without reopening every wound you ever healed." My eyes darted to the lawyer, an older gentleman with kind eyes. "What is this?" I asked, my voice quivering. He nodded slowly. "Mr. Peterson asked me to deliver it after his passing. He also left a document, a property deed." "A deed?" I frowned. "To what?" He placed a brown envelope on my table. "To your father's old house." My stomach dropped. That house was sold decades ago.
He sighed.
"Not officially. Michael bought it back, Eleanor. Over 20 years ago." I froze. "Why would he?" "Read the letter," he said softly, stepping back to give me privacy. I unfolded the next page. "Eleanor, your father wasn't only the reason I left. He was the reason I never came back. I discovered something he did. Something that changed the course of our lives forever. I've kept it hidden all these years because I didn't want to ruin your memories. But I can't leave this world without telling you the truth." My hands clenched. My father, again. That same name haunting me from beyond decades. I turned the page, and as my eyes moved line by line, the world beneath me seemed to collapse. "Your father didn't just threaten my mother, Eleanor. He paid her to leave the country with me. He gave her money, told her we'd never be allowed near you again. He said he would destroy her reputation, expose her secret, that she was not my biological mother, that I was born from someone else. A woman he once loved before your mother. A woman he abandoned. The room spun. I pressed my palm against my chest, struggling for breath. No, I whispered. No, that can't be. But Michael had left proof, letters, photos, receipts, everything. He'd stored them inside that same property deed, which was now spread open on my kitchen table like a confession of history itself. The man I had worshipped, my father, the good pastor, the pillar of our family, had orchestrated every heartbreak I'd ever endured.
For days, I couldn't sleep.
I'd sit by my window staring at the horizon, wondering how one man could shape so many destinies with his silence. I was angry, yes, but beneath that anger was a deep, aching sadness. Then one evening, I drove to the old house. It had been empty for years, swallowed by ivy and time. I walked through the creaking doorway, my shoes echoing on the dusty floor. Every corner whispered with memory, my mother humming in the kitchen, my father reading his Bible by the fire, my younger self dreaming of Michael under that very roof. I found the study locked. I broke it open with trembling hands, and there it was, a box, neatly labeled Church Funds, 1973. Inside were documents, ledgers, and letters that told a darker truth. My father had used church money to pay off Michael's mother. He had buried his sin under the guise of godliness. The next day, I visited the town pastor, a man named Reverend Harris, kind and wise. He had known my father. When I showed him the documents, he went pale. "My God," he whispered. "Eleanor, if this is true, it changes everything we thought we knew." "It is true," I said quietly, "and the world deserves to know." For the first time in 50 years, I didn't feel weak. I felt strong, righteous. I wasn't just that girl whose love had been stolen by circumstance. I was a woman standing on the ashes of lies, ready to bring truth to light. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, for Michael, for my mother, and for that young version of me who had cried herself to sleep believing love had failed her. With Reverend Harris's help, we gathered everything: the letters, the ledgers, the receipts. The truth was undeniable. The church board reviewed it in silence, their faces pale. They called a town meeting to address the moral failings of the past. I stood before them that night, trembling but resolute. My voice cracked only once, when I said Michael's name. "My father was a good man to many," I said. "But to the ones who loved him most, he was a stranger built of secrets. I don't stand here to destroy his legacy, but to free those bound by it." The room was silent. A few older faces bowed in shame. One woman sobbed quietly in the back. When the meeting ended, Reverend Harris placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done," he said. But inside, I didn't feel victory. I felt hollow, as if justice had a weight all its own. That night, I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No name, just 2 words written in familiar handwriting. "For you." Inside was a photograph, me and Michael, taken at the county fair in 1969. On the back, he had written, "The truth sets us free, but love keeps us alive. Find peace, Ellie." I pressed it to my chest, tears streaming down. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was louder than thunder. Over the next few weeks, the town buzzed with whispers. Some pitied me, others admired me, but I didn't care. I started visiting Michael's grave every Sunday, talking to him as if he were sitting right beside me. I told him about the truth coming out, about how I finally understood everything. And every time I'd leave, a small white feather would appear on the ground near the headstone, delicate, glowing in the sunlight. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. But I liked to believe it was his way of saying, "You did it, Ellie." One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, I sat by his grave a little longer than usual. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of lilacs. I spoke quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I forgave him, you know," I said. "My father. I think you already did, long before I could." The air around me felt warm, still. peaceful. I closed my eyes and imagined his hand in mine again, steady, comforting, eternal. But deep down, I sensed something unfinished. A final truth, one last string tied to the past, waiting to be untangled. And I would soon discover it, a revelation that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and destiny. The morning after the town meeting felt strangely quiet. The world looked the same sunlight pouring through my curtains, the same wind brushing the roses outside. Yet inside me, everything had shifted. The ghosts that had haunted me for half a century seemed lighter, as though they had finally been heard. But peace, I learned, is not something that simply arrives one morning. It grows quietly, like ivy reclaiming an old wall. For weeks, I walked through my days with a sense of deliberate stillness. I cleaned the kitchen as if each dish carried memory. I made tea at the same time every afternoon, sometimes setting 2 cups on the table before remembering I only needed one. And sometimes, without warning, a soft laugh would escape me, because I could almost hear him teasing me for still overbrewing the tea. That's how grief lingers. It doesn't vanish. It just learns how to hum instead of scream. One afternoon, a knock came at my door. It was a young woman, late 30s, maybe, with eyes that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. She looked nervous, clutching a small envelope in her hand. "Mrs. Peterson?" she asked softly. "Yes, dear."
Come in.
She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the living room like she was searching for familiarity. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "My name's Rachel.
I
think you might have known my grandmother, Clara Jensen." My breath caught. Clara Jensen, Michael's mother. "I did," I said carefully. "A long time ago." She nodded, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "Before she passed, she gave me something. She said I'd know when it was time to deliver it. I didn't understand then, but after hearing about the meeting, I think this belongs to you." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was Michael's handwriting again. "Eleanor, if Rachel finds you, it means she's found her truth too. She's my granddaughter, the daughter of the son I never knew I had." I froze. His son? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "My father. He passed away when I was little. My grandmother never told me who his father was until right before she died. She said he was a good man, but he carried too much guilt to ever be a father." I sat down slowly, my knees weak. All this time, Michael had a son, and through him, a granddaughter, and neither of us had known. The letter continued. "I made mistakes, Ellie. I tried to protect you by hiding truths, but life has a way of circling back to what's meant to be found. If Rachel ever knocks on your door, please tell her who I was, not the man who hid, but the man who loved deeply and broke only because he couldn't bear to see you hurt." My tears fell freely this time, but they weren't just for loss. They were for the years stolen by silence, and for the miracle that somehow love had found its way home through time itself. Rachel and I spent hours talking that day. She looked at old photos, asking about the young man in the army uniform, about the fair where we'd laughed until our ribs hurt, about the garden he used to build birdhouses in. I told her everything, the truth, not the polished version. When she left that evening, she hugged me tightly. "I'm glad he had you," she whispered. "And I'm glad he lives on through you," I said. After she drove off, I stood at the window, watching her car disappear into the horizon. My reflection in the glass showed an old woman with tear-streaked cheeks, but her eyes looked alive again. That night, I returned to Michael's grave with the letter. I placed it beside the white feather that always waited for me there. "I met her, Michael," I whispered. "She's wonderful. She has your eyes and your stubborn kindness." The wind picked up, brushing through the trees. A single feather lifted from the ground and twirled upward, catching the moonlight before disappearing into the night sky.
For the first time, I didn't cry.
I smiled, because I realized something he had always known. Love doesn't end. It just changes form. Weeks passed, and the old house my father once owned was officially transferred into my name. I decided not to sell it. Instead, I restored it slowly, gently, repainting the walls, fixing the porch, planting lilacs where the garden used to be. Every brushstroke felt like rewriting history with softer hands. When it was done, I hung a small sign by the door, the Peterson-Jensen home. A symbol that love had finally reconciled what time had broken. Rachel visited often after that. She'd bring her daughter, a sweet little girl named Grace, who'd run through the garden, chasing butterflies. One afternoon, Grace pointed at an old photograph of Michael hanging by the fireplace. "Is that Grandpa?" she asked. Rachel smiled. "Yes, honey. That's your great-grandpa. He loved to build birdhouses." Grace tilted her head. "Then why don't we build one for him?" So we did. Together, 3 generations of women, one past, one present, one future, building something small but eternal. When we hung it on the oak tree, a bird flew down and perched right on top of it. Grace clapped her hands.
See?
He likes it already. And for a moment, it felt like the world had come full circle, like all the pain, all the secrets, all the lost years had led to this quiet beauty. In the evenings now, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink behind the lilacs. The air smells of earth and forgiveness. Sometimes I still catch myself whispering, "Good night, Michael," out of habit. And sometimes, I swear, I can almost hear a faint reply in the wind. "Good night, Ellie." If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: life doesn't always give us second chances, but love does. It finds its way through decades, through silence, through grief. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself to remember without pain. I used to think love was something that ended when people did. But now I know it lingers, like the echo of a song you can still hum long after the music stops. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, I want you to remember, it's never too late to forgive, to love again, or to open your heart to the unexpected knock on your door. Sometimes that knock is the past coming home in a new shape. And sometimes it's love, reminding you it never really left. Did you feel her story? Tell me what city you're listening from. I love hearing your stories. And if this journey touched your heart, subscribe and stay with me. I've got many more to share, stories that remind us all that love, even after 50 years, still finds a way home.